I am going to introduce Neil Van Dine, who is co-founder and country director of Haiti Outreach. He has dedicated 32 years to advancing the development of the country of Haiti, where he's lived for 32 years. And one of the things that he has spent a lot of time and effort on is bringing clean water supplies to rural villages in Haiti. And this is something that a lot of us in Alfred are very interested in. We, in fact, sponsored, I think many of you know that we sponsored a well a few years ago, and even a group from Alfred went down for an inauguration of a community well down there. So Neil, in continuing with my local talent theme for this year, Neil is local, grew up in Wellsville, just was saying before, a few minutes ago, that he was in Wellsville a little while ago and made sure he had a visit to the Texas Hot before he left. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Neil. At the end, we'll take questions. So just kind of raise your hand or something, and or wave your hand, or send a question in the chat, and we'll answer questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Michelle, and greetings, everybody. It's nice to be in Alfred, I guess, a little bit. At least my face is showing up in Alfred if I'm not physically present. I appreciate that. And I really, really miss Western New York since I moved away from there. But here I'm, as Michelle mentioned, I founded an organization called Haiti Outreach. I'm going to talk about Haiti today. I founded the organization in 1997. It's based in Pillon, Haiti, and we have a US office in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a 501c3 nonprofit in the States and a registered non-governmental organization in Haiti. So for those of you that don't know, Haiti is located in the Caribbean. It shares the island of Hispaniola with the Dominican Republic. So Haiti has a kind of a unique history, a very unique history that not many people are aware of. And I think that plays into some of the thought processes that the folks have here. Haiti was the second new republic in the Western Hemisphere, and it's the only successful slave rebellion to form a new country. It's also the first constitution in the world establishing racial equality. So Haiti was founded as a republic shortly after the United States was. In fact, in the war, the revolution against France, where they beat out Napoleon, the reason we have the Louisiana Purchase happening in 1803 was because Haiti, Napoleon losing Haiti caused him to give up all his efforts here in the New World. So we got about a third of our country because of Haiti's revolution. And for those of you that don't know, we are working about clean and available water in the country of Haiti. My goal, my personal goal, is that Haiti be a developed country. And for that to be a developed country, that means that everyone needs to have access to clean, potable water. You can see in the lower corner here, a guy with a bucket and a little stream. There's a spring there that he's scooping water out of a hole in the ground with a cup and dumping it into his bucket. About a third of the people in the country get access to their water that way, or from an open river or something similar. And those of you might remember that there was a huge cholera outbreak in 2011 that killed thousands of people in Haiti. It just raced across the country. So what we do in a nutshell is work with these communities to transform the way they look at water. Drill a well with something like the rig you see in the top corner and put in a hand pump where people can get access to clean water. The challenge is that people have been doing that for a long time. And despite them doing that for such a long time, around half of Haiti's water and sanitation infrastructure doesn't function. And a lot of it looks like this right here. We've gone from a hand pump that works to a cracked concrete base with shoes and debris around it, and the top of the pump is missing. Nobody's getting water out of that. So many groups invest in these things, but they don't invest in the management of it. So when we talk about the breakdown and why people don't have access to water, it's not because work hasn't been done to bring them water. It's because they haven't developed the frameworks necessary to manage that. And we call that systems work. When we talk about systems, we have systems all around us, certainly in the States, that allow us to live the life we want to live. You have an electrical system, a grid that brings electricity to wherever you are. You have a water system that brings water to where you are. You have a school system, you have a healthcare system, you have all these things. And when these systems break down that we've developed for our communities, we are forced into a conversation around relief. To describe one of these systems would be maybe the electrical grid that you're looking at it right now. You have your computer running on it, the internet's running on it. If the electrical grid went down, if the power went off, I can pretty much guarantee you that all of us sitting on the screen here would just sit there and wait for it to come back on. But the system in the background is that there's guys that grab tool belts and jump into trucks and move transformers and hang wire and fix poles and do all that stuff. There's a whole system, a hierarchical system that makes all that go back to normal. And our participation in that is that we write a check at the end of the month to the power company. So when we talk about water systems, even something as simple as a well like this, we're talking about the need to have that and a system that somebody's responsible for it, that if it breaks, there's money to fix it, and so on and so forth. Now, what often happens is that people just put in the well or just put in a water system, and they don't think about the concept of development. So when these systems fail us, the electrical system, or there's a hurricane or a flood or a tornado or an earthquake or whatever else you have going on, these things happen that disrupt those systems that we use to function as a society. Could be a pandemic, right? We're dealing with that now. As the coronavirus spreads, it's overwhelming our healthcare system and it starts to break down. And that creates environment. Those kind of things create environments where you need to provide relief. We have to do whatever we can to make sure that people stay alive. And if that means that we have to put bottles of water on a plane in Buffalo and fly them into Port-au-Prince, that's what we're going to do, because people need water and we got to do whatever we have to do to keep them alive. Now, that window of relief should be very short term, not very long term. And that window should only last really a couple months, certainly never more than 6 months. Because what you need to do is, while you're bringing them bottles of water, you need to go back and look at what the systems they had were broken and how do you get them back online to providing that service again. So that is a relief concept, and development is about a community making a conscious decision to say, we want to have this service in our community. We want to have a Starbucks. We want to have an electrical grid. We want to have a water system. And that community chooses to develop that service in their community and figure out how to pay for it. The picture you're looking at here is one of my favorite pictures because it really illustrates what goes on. You see here in the foreground is a well that's clearly not working. There's leaves scattered all around it. There's paint buckets there and a broken lawnmower thrown in for good measure. And so it's clearly not working. But if you look up above it, on the top of the picture, there's a blue and white building with a couple of pipe stands outside of it. That's actually a water system that another group built that fed the town, and it's not working. And so the relief mindset came to this area and said, wow, rather than fix the existing system, we're going to drill a new well because we can't deal with the management of the system. We're going to drill a new well and everybody will have water and everything will be fine. But they didn't deal with that systemic hierarchy about creating management for this. And within 6 months, that well was broken. Now you can see how I talked about this in the last slide. It's not for lack of investment that Haiti doesn't have water. It's because of a lack of management. And when we talk about development, we use the UN and WHO Sustainable Development Goals. This is a set of 17 different factors that they decided have been that play into the development of any community or country. Now, our work centers around number 6 in blue there, around clean water and sanitation. So they've set out a set of metrics that say everyone in the world can have clean water and improved sanitation by 2030. And what does that mean? The goal is that everyone, that means 100% of houses in the world, have access to potable water. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals call that a 30-minute round trip. In other words, we in the States, or you guys in Alfred, probably don't have to walk more than 20 feet to get a glass of water. You just get up, walk to your kitchen, grab a glass and turn on the faucet and the water comes out of the pipe. What the UN is talking about is just having that water point be within a 30-minute round trip of a walking trip of your house. That means just that simple goal. People aren't going to have water in their houses. They're just trying to get clean water within a 30-minute walk of your house. Now that water needs to be public and sustainably managed. That also you need to have houses with latrines, because not having access to clean water is one thing, but if people are practicing open defecation, then people are still going to be getting sick. So what we did with this was said, wow, if we're going to figure this out, if we want to know that everybody had access to water, how would we know that? And we basically sat down and said, well, we need to know where every water point is, and we need to know where every house is. And if we know those two things, then we can draw a circle around it that represents a 30-minute round trip. That's roughly 500 meters, 500 yards, about the length of 5 football fields. And so we set out to start mapping this, and we've mapped nearly the entire country right now. You can see on the exploded picture here what that looks like. Every circle on that map is a water point with a 500-meter radius drawn around it. And if you can see the little black dots there, the little black dots represent a house. So now we can see spatially how many houses, how many black dots are within one of those circles. And if that water point is functioning and clean to drink, it's green. If it's contaminated with E. coli, it's red. And if it's broken, it's yellow. So here you get a pretty nice idea of how many water points are out there and broken. These are water points that churches and organizations, USAID, UNICEF, World Bank, World Vision, CARE, you name it. These are the organizations that have done all this work. They've invested millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in this infrastructure with no management around them. And so when they're broken, nobody can repair them. We use a 5-way test here that we use to measure this and bring this into the authorities' knowledge base. The first is the water point functional? The second is it responsibly managed? The third is, does everyone have access to sanitation? That means, is everyone using a latrine, or are people pooping in the woods? Fourth, is that water point clean and potable? And last but not least, even if I knew all 4 of those things for a community, it's very different to say that I knew that 10 years ago than knowing somebody looked at it last week. So it needs to be regularly inspected. That hierarchical system needs to be able to show that people are looking at it and monitoring it. Those 5 things spell out a Creole word called frappe. And frappe in the Creole language means banging on all cylinders. It's kind of working the way it should. So we use that simple set of metrics with the local authorities to help them be able to supervise and decide where they're going to create interventions. Now, for Michelle's benefit, we also include groundwater mapping in this. So as we develop this tool and we can see where things need to happen and what needs to be fixed and where people have access and where they don't, part of that is looking at the groundwater models. So as we create these maps and as we measure where the springs are and where the rivers are, we work with a professional geologist to create a drilling potential map that looks like this. So on this area, the blue areas are where we can easily find water. We don't need to worry about where we drill. The green areas, it's pretty easy, roughly about an 80% chance, 60 to 80% chance. The yellow areas is a little more dicey. It's probably a 40 to 60% chance of finding water. Orange is roughly 20 to 40, and red is less than 20% chance. So you can see how we use this tool to guide where we can drill wells and where we can't, and where groundwater is available. So I do have a short video here. I don't know if that's going to play. I hope it will. I might have to stop and redo it. That describes the process here. Let me stop my share again for a second because I'm not sure I shared it. To share the video, optimize for video. Is it back up?
They start the long walk back home. The entire community gathers, along with local authorities and Haiti Outreach staff, for the celebration. They celebrate that they now have clean water in their communities. The community unlocks the well house and pumps the fresh, clean water for the first time. This team effort from our Haiti Outreach staff to local authorities to the community members themselves has helped us to successfully bring sustainable clean water access to over 350 communities over the last 11 years. That's a total of over 107,000 people that will have sustainable access to clean water for over 10 years.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, merci, for traveling this road with us.
So as we continue on with this, oh, you're not hearing me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Right, sorry, it says microphone issue. So how do we do this? And the video explains it a little bit, but I'm just going to walk through the process. The very first thing is that it depends upon the community initiating the process. When I talked about relief versus development, there's a very distinct difference there. When we're talking about relief, it's somebody showing up at your door to say, here's some help, right? But when you're talking about development, it's our community deciding we need help and we want to do this. So they come to us. It's very, very important that the community initiate this process, that it's not just somewhere that Haiti Outreach shows up. Then we work with that community to assess the community and see what happens. How many houses are there? How many people are there? How many boys? How many girls? Because that community needs to know how many people they have there. They haven't thought about this group endeavor in the past. And so this is a new knowledge point for them. They talk about the need to pay for the service of water and be able to manage and maintain it. How do they buy parts? Where does the money come from? How much money do they need? And so they elect a management committee as part of the training process, that we work with this management committee to train them into the management needs. That community development and training takes about 3 months, and we call that animation in Haiti. And it's only after that training is complete and they can show us that they have the capacity and tools necessary to manage and maintain the well, it's only then that we would drill the well. After that, the well house is built in blue and white like this, and the well is inaugurated. And the community manages the well in an ongoing way. So the video said 350, but we're over 500 communities now, representing a little over 200,000 people. And what's cool about this is you heard me at the beginning say that half of Haiti's water and sanitation infrastructure isn't working. With Haiti Outreach, with those 500 communities, we have a 90% success rate over the last 16 years. This is far and away the best results of any water and sanitation program in the world. So it's really and readily apparent that if by investing in the management and transformation, behavior change in a community, that you can produce amazing results. So what have we done with this? Well, a couple of years ago, when we looked at how many wells are needed to complete Haiti, it came up to around 10,000 wells when we did the mapping and everything else. We looked and saw Haiti needs around 10,000 wells to get everything done. Well, that's way more than a little organization like Haiti Outreach can do. And so we worked with Rotary International to create HANWASH, the Haiti National Clean Water Sanitation and Hygiene Strategy. This is all about taking the tools and methodologies that Haiti Outreach has developed over the last 15 years and scaling them using Rotary International's network of volunteers and funding. We created Hand Wash as an umbrella institution that pulls in Rotarians from around the world, but also the National Water Office of Haiti's government, including other nonprofit organizations like Pure Water for the World, Hope for Haiti, and most recently, the World Bank. These are the implementers. These are the people building this infrastructure without management. And so by pulling them into this umbrella and aligning them with our core values, we have an opportunity to create more sustainable infrastructure as we go along. So as part of that process, you can see here, this is a meeting with the mayor and the Rotarians. Local Rotarian, that guy in the green shirt, is the president of the Leogan Rotary Club. The American guy in the jacket is one of Rotary International's international directors, a core group of about 30 people that manage the entire organization. And the guy in the blue shirt is the mayor of one of the towns where we're working to create interventions, in Cavaillon in the south. Now, the mayor there in the blue shirt, this town is in Cavaillon in the south. It was within 10 miles of the epicenter of last month's earthquake. Well, the mayor's house is damaged. The community leaders that were working here in the commune, the elected officials, nearly all of their houses were destroyed. We had just inaugurated 4 communities in this town, and of the 315 houses served by those 4 wells, 303 of them were destroyed. So now Hand Wash and Rotary are working with the mayor to help get the community back on its feet. The testament to this is that those wells, all 4 of those wells, remained undamaged. We had 1 well house damaged, but the well itself remained online. So they've developed now a service in their community that provides them access, especially since during the earthquake, right after the earthquake, all of the springs, all the groundwater springs in the area dried up. So I'm going to stop there because I know that there will be questions, and we have a broad stream of people here, from church members who funded a well to Michelle, who wants to know more technical information. So I'm going to take the rest of the time to answer questions and remind you guys that you visited one of these inaugurations. This is the crew from Alfred back a couple years ago in the community of Cabaret, where they participated in the inauguration of a well that's still operating today. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Neil. I'm going to open it up for questions. Why don't, if you have a question, just either
Just shout it out.
or shout it out. Make sure to unmute yourself, or if you prefer to put your question in the chat, whatever, we'll make it a free for all and see how that goes. And okay, Gary, go ahead.
There's a fellow in the community by the name of Reed Harvey.
Oh yeah.
You have been, I was just going to ask if you've been in touch with him, and if you have, because you said you have a 90% success rate. And I find that maybe you don't want to deal with any other technologies, but if you have been in touch with Reed Harvey, could you talk a little bit about whether or not there's an area for cooperation with the kind of silver nitrate technology that he's utilizing?
Yeah, Reed's done some cool stuff with the silver nitrate, binding it with ceramics to provide a filtration mechanism. So one way to look at this is that there's all kinds of nifty technologies, right? There's 100 different kinds of pumps and 500 different kinds of filters, and there's silver nitrate, and there's Potter for Peace filters, and there's ceramic filters, and there's, reverse osmosis filters. Think of all those things as like a toolkit that you can bring as a solution to a different community. So I talked about wells and hand pumps here. That's just one technology. What's important in Reed's technology is, if you're going to do that, is it a household filter? What's the system for managing and maintaining that over time? So you might have a water system that feeds a village and pipes water to everyone's house. And there you could build a filtration bed with Reed's technology that could do that. So then think about the framework around that. Where do they get the replacement media? If we give them that the first time, where do they buy it from again? How much does it cost? How will they replace it in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years or whenever it fails? So it's that management piece of it. Whatever that technology is, it has an operational lifetime. It has a cost over that lifetime and a replacement cost. So whatever that technology is, it can be cool and whiz bang or whatever, but what I'm focusing on is the management piece behind that. So.
Other questions?
Other questions?
Yeah, I'll go to a technical question. How deep do you generally have to drill?
That's a good question. It varies a lot. Haiti is very, very mountainous. So the reason we have earthquakes is the reason we have mountains too, right? There's all kinds of faults running around there, and that creates a lot of mountains. Haiti actually has an 8,000 foot peak here on the island, on a Caribbean island. So it creates all different geologies. I would say the average depth that we drill in areas where we can find water is probably around 180 feet. But the range of that is probably 30 feet to 400 feet. We tend not to go more than 300 feet because that's the limit of a hand pump. You can't pump water deeper than 300 feet really with a hand pump.
That was my next question. It's all hand pumps, no electric pumps or anything like that.
Well, yeah, no, I only talked about the hand pumps here, but when you're talking about water systems, again, it comes back to the management. So one of those hand pumps can be maintained for about $25 US a year. In other words, a community only has to come up with $25 over the course of a year to be able to have enough money to buy the parts necessary to maintain it. So when you look at, for instance, Cabaret, where the well that you guys inaugurated and paid for in Alfred, that community has around $60 or $80 in savings right now, as they've spent money, and they've spent their $25 a year in maintaining it, but they also have a reserve fund. So in really, really poor communities, people prefer to invest their energy to pump the water rather than spend the money. But you could just as easily put a solar pump in there or a generator driven one. What changes there is that you can't do it for $25 a year anymore. It's going to be $100 or $150 a year or more even. So it's really only where you have a dense population that you can invest in those other technologies, right? Because the community has to be able to maintain it. If they're not able to generate the revenue necessary to keep it going, then it's just a relief thing, and I'll have to come back in 5 years and fix it, or 2 years, or 10 years. So the idea for me is, what are we putting in place that allows them to develop that and manage it and maintain it on their
Okay, Lori?
I'm wondering if you have been able to see any results in these communities beyond the clean water from their just learning how to work as a community together.
Now, that's a really good question. And the short answer is I have only anecdotal evidence to that. I don't have, as data-driven as we are, I don't have the data around it. What I can say is that this is quite often the first time that they have come together as a community to manage some kind of communal resource. I don't know if there's any economics people here, but there's the poverty of the commons. There's a law called what is it called? Tragedy of the commons. That we as communities are terrible at managing these communal resources, right? We don't work well together as communities, and global warming is a great example of that, right? So we're doing what we do here, and they do what they do there, and the whole environment is suffering because we can't figure out how to work together. So to answer your question, Lori, these guys have now come together. They've figured out a way to talk and come together and manage this communal resource. We have seen communities do other things, like decide that they want to build a road, and they figure out how to work together to get a road. So there's emergency access when somebody has to go to the hospital. We've seen them be fierce proponents of maintaining the integrity of the managed well. We had one community that there was a guy who wanted to be elected mayor, and he came by and whipped out a gun and shot the lock off the well and said, "The water is free. I'm going to be the mayor. Water should be free." And so the community let him go because he had a gun. And then they went to the judge and said, "We got to stop this." They put a mandate out for the guy to be arrested. And they called us to say, "Would you come back us up and say that this is a managed well?" And before the guy got into prison, he bought a new lock, written letter of apology to the community, and put the lock back on himself. He said, "I'm very sorry." And he was not elected mayor. So it's that kind of ownership that we're trying to generate, that kind of mind shift, that transformation in the way the community looks at things is what's so important for us. And that's why you won't see any more than 10% of our wells sitting out there broken. Hi, Cecilia.
Hi. I was just wondering if the political turmoil over there following the president's assassination has affected your work in any way?
No, the short answer to that is no. We have built a very resilient framework for operating. We operate very closely with government officials, local officials, and the communities themselves. So what did happen with that? It was really devastating to our team and to the whole country, basically, to have the president be assassinated, because there was a mindset there that even though the government was doing this stuff, they're exploiting the people, they're raking in the money and stealing and so on and so forth. Everybody had in the back of their head that at the very least they're protecting themselves. They might not care about us, but they're protecting themselves. So to see somebody walk in and just shoot the president like that was really devastating to our team, to realize that they're not safe. Nobody's safe anywhere in the country. But in terms of like our activities with the community, no, the government had to shut everything down for a couple of days. So we were like 3 days that we couldn't have community meetings. But other than that, we've continued to operate. The communities often demand it. The communities protect us because they know that we're there helping them. It's not something that we're giving them that other people want to take away. It's training, it's knowledge that we're providing to them as they learn. So it's great to see the community step up. We often see communities, like when we start training them, we'll visit the area, and part of our team will go visit. Quite often they'll say, "We can't get the drilling rig in here. We can't get the trucks in here." And the community will come together and like spend 3 days chopping with picks and axes and so on and so forth, and smooth out the road necessary to get the truck in there. And it's really exciting to see them come together. Gary, I see a question from Gary there. So composting latrines, that's a good question. So quite often we'll find less than half of the houses have latrines. In some communities, none of the houses have a latrine. And if no house has a latrine, or only half of them, that means that there's a lot of piles of crap in the village, right? People tend to wander off into where there's banana trees or someplace where nobody can see them, and they crap on the ground, unfortunately. So part of our work involves every household building and using a latrine. But we can't have clean water without everyone having sanitation. So something like 94% of the houses in the communities where we inaugurate a well on average have a latrine. A lot of them, every house has a latrine. As far as composting latrines goes, we do not do that. Because they're digging pit latrines, it's easier and cheaper for them to just dig a new latrine when the latrine fills up. Where you see composting latrines are in the more urban areas around the cities, where people don't have the surface land area necessary to dig a latrine, and they'll use composting toilets there. So another cool technology. Yeah, Nicole.
Yeah, I was just curious when the community set up a management team to kind of figure out how they're going to pay for and where they're going to find the resources. Do you find that each community comes up with a similar structure to that, or do you see very different ideas coming out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So because this is about transforming the mindset and like shifting the way people perceive things and behavior change, we don't give them everything they need. So our trainers actually go there with this kind of in the background. They know what that budget needs to look like, and they just kind of guide the conversation towards that. But it's really a discovery process and thought. What's the word I'm looking for? It's really a discovery process for the community. The only thing we tell them is that, look, you need $25 a year to maintain this pump. That becomes the basis of their budget. Then they go, well, yeah, but we're going to need a broom, we're going to need to buy a receipt book, and we're going to need a pen, and we're going to need a lock, and we're going to need this. So they build their own budget that way. So our guys have a framework for that in the background to use as an example, but we don't ever give that to them. The long training process is about about 20 or 25 meetings where they discuss the different pieces of that. So while each community has its own unique budget and unique set of rules and guidelines, they are kind of similar. So one community, for instance, had a rule like, no cows near the well. And I saw that and I was like, why no cows near the well? And you go there and the guy's like, well, my Uncle Joe had a cow and he tied it up near one of these wells, and the cow got loose and broke the well. So we don't want any cows near our wells, right? And, another one's like, no eating sugarcane near the wells, because they eat sugarcane and they tear it off and they litter it on the ground and it makes the environment unsanitary. So we don't want any of that. So, you see a whole gamut of things within the communities, what they come up with. And it's cool because they own it. And when they go back to refer to that document that they created, they can always add more to it. So, we hadn't thought about that. So that ownership is really, really important. Michelle?
Okay, I'll ask. Actually, I have two questions. One short one.
Okay.
Do you test the water periodically coming out of, or does somebody test the water periodically?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So we test the water when we drill. We test the water for about 15 different water quality parameters. And in that giant survey of the whole country, all the water points, we test again for about 15 different water quality indicators. The biggest one and most important for the community is the E. coli test. Knowing that it's clean and free of E. coli, which is a bacteria in the gut that makes everybody sick, is important. So we test that when we do a pump test on the well, when we find out how much flow it is, we make sure it's clean there. And then we test it again after we install the pump and before we inaugurate the well. So we've only started doing that in the last 5 years. And the communities now, the later communities that have been inaugurated, build that cost into their budget so they can test their well for E. coli about once a year. It costs about $12 for the E. coli test. So that's a significant burden for some of these rural communities. Like it adds a significant level of costs, like 25%. To their household cost.
Okay, my second question was, and I'm not even sure how to phrase this, but I know in Bangladesh, there have been, well, there's all kinds of problems there, but
yeah,
some cultural resistance, I guess, to some of the help that some organizations have tried to put in. Now, some of that is well deserved because someone came in and put in a bunch of wells that were contaminated with arsenic. But is there any cultural? I can't imagine any culture would say, I'd rather walk, half a mile to the stream to get water than have you guys put in a well. But is there any?
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's huge cultural issues around that, and fierce pride. I mean, one of the reasons that I showed the slides at the beginning was because Haiti was a slave-driven country. There was, 10 times as many slaves as slave owners here. And when the slaves took over the country, there's a fierce amount of pride for them to be able to say, look, this is our country and we're creating it this way. And we wanted it to be that way. So it's the continuing struggle to get the country going between assassinations and coups and earthquakes and hurricanes and so on and so forth. And the dictatorship that lasted 27 years. I mean, all these things kind of work against having a country that operates the way they want it to. So there's a huge amount of pride and around that. And we have to be conscious of that and work not just on that community level with these individual households, but so here's the well, here's the committee that manages it. Who oversees that committee? And if they're doing a good job or not, is that the mayor? Is that the local water official? Or who is that? And who oversees that guy? And so that whole hierarchy is what needs to be built. And that shift and transformation and behavior change has to happen with every one of those levels. So that's really our focus with the hand wash team and Rotary is how do we get to all these different levels and work on every level? Rotarians are some of the most amazing service-oriented people in the world. And they do fantastic work, and a lot of them are very well connected. When we launched this, the Prime Minister of Haiti was a Rotarian, along with 2 or 3 other ministers high up in the government. So it created an opportunity for us to launch hand wash in this nationwide initiative in a way that wasn't possible before. So yeah, it has to happen on every level. So as you can see, I can talk about this stuff all day. I've lived my life doing it for 30 years, and I appreciate your patience listening. When the cholera outbreak occurred, the government came to us and said, they asked us to do around 25 wells in the heartland of where the cholera outbreak occurred. So Haiti Outreach did around 25 boreholes, community wells in the area of Mirebalais where the cholera outbreak occurred. In addition, we used that nationwide mapping of E. coli. We shared that with the cholera response team. And they use that framework to help eliminate cholera, which has happened, I guess, about 2 years ago now. So, in fact, this most recent earthquake, the National Water Office used a set of tools that Haiti Outreach developed to manage the response team. So now, whenever there's a disaster, all this relief aid comes in, and they now have a website that they're managing and maintaining that. All this data that I showed you, I'll show you quick. I know you have to get out of here, but. All this data is available online. This is the national government's disaster response website, but this is the mapping that we did of the entire country, including the groundwater potential. This is all live data, and it'll take a second to show up. But you can see that we'll have water points will populate all across this screen here. We don't have water quality for all of them yet. We're working on that, but where we have them, and they're in color. So as you can see, we can zoom in on any one of these. Take a second to redraw. You can see the black dots are all the houses. And the circles redraw. Apologize, my internet's a little bit slow. And if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share this. So you can see here that some water point needs to be brought because these are houses without access. They don't fall within range of a water point. All these red ones are contaminated with E. coli. So all of these houses here, essentially all of these houses are drinking water that's making them sick every day, right? And we can click on any one of these and see what it is. So Carobit is one of the wells that we've done. We did that with World Vision. I can see that it has no E. coli, and there are 45 houses within 500 meters. So you can see how we use this as a planning tool for deciding where interventions need to happen. And we do that on a communal level where we have local elected officials, which is laid out in this area here. This is where I live right here in Peon, and we've got Peon up to 84%. So 84% of the houses in our town fall within 30 minutes of a clean water point. So
Our students will recognize that as a
How
good.
do you get your water?
sorry,
Well,
Mary?
How do you get your water?
How do I get my water? Well, I drilled a well. I have a well. My house and our office here are all off the grid. So I have a completely independent solar system I built, and I use that to power a submersible pump, well pump, for my house. So I have pressurized water just like you guys in my
Okay,
house.
so that is your own personal pump, and other people could have a personal pump too?
Well, yeah, they could do that if they're willing to do that. I mean, it's not free, right?
No, I know.
So even with a significant initial investment for the solar system and the well and the pump, if I take that away, it still probably costs me $100 or $150 a month over time to replace the batteries, for instance, on the system.
Right.
So, if people were willing to spend that kind of money on your water and electric bill, $150 a month for water and electric isn't too bad. It's probably close to what you guys pay up there. I don't even know.
Right.
I haven't paid a water or electric bill in the States in 30 years, so I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. This was very informative.
No
Yes,
problem.
thank you, Neil. Let's take an opportunity to thank Neil formally. And then I'm sure that if there were still a few lingering questions, but otherwise, thank you very much. This has really been great, really interesting and eye-opening, I think, for a lot of people. So thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank
Next
you all.
week, for those of you, next week we have Madeline Dewey, who graduated from Alfred Allman and is a civil engineer, and she'll be talking to us next week. So
Bye.
bye, everybody. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Michelle. Bye-bye. Bye, Lori.